This is Top Farmers Know How, brought to you by MSD Animal Health.
For Sharemilkers Matt and Jennifer Davison, the lead up to the Canterbury calving season of 2016 was just like any other year. Calf sheds were prepared, pasture covers were on target, staff were all up to speed. They were looking forward to the season ahead. Then one morning, Matt went out to shift brakes, and what he saw made his stomach drop.
There was about a dozen cows that wouldn't get up, they wouldn't move. So to me, that was an alert straight away because in my whole dairying career, I've never ever had that amount of cows stay down in one spot.
It wasn't clear what they were dealing with straight away because at first the down dry cows seemed to respond to metabolic bags. But when 6 had died by the afternoon and several more began passing a bloody scour, Jennifer suspected the worst. One of their graziers had recently told them some cattle on his place had been diagnosed with Salmonella Brandenburg, which had prompted Jennifer and Matt to bring that mob of 300 cows they had grazing at the runoff home early. Now these were the cows getting sick. So on a hunch, Jennifer took some fecal samples from the sick cows into the vets for testing.
Like your heart kind of broke for them, and you knew what they had been exposed with, and it's really hard to deal with something that you don't know. So for me, I was like, well, I'm not prepared to take this as a calcium deficiency because this wouldn't last this long. It wouldn't. A calcium deficiency to me would not be affecting the cows in this kind of way.
While they waited for the lab results to come back, Matt and Jennifer decided to take on sole responsibility for looking after the sick mob, so they wouldn't put their staff at risk. They knew that people can get salmonella from cows. They monitored and nursed those 300 cows around the clock, treated every sick cow with antibiotics and anti-inflammatories, and put strict biosecurity precautions into place.
We made our own set of cattle yards around there so that every day we could just pull the animals in that needed to be treated. There was days where we'd be going up to the vets and we'd be spending $5,500 on drugs just to keep our cows alive.
We had a newborn baby at that stage as well, so I guess at the forefront of our minds was making sure that we don't bring anything home. So it was just as simple as having our own overalls and gumboots that we went over there and dealt with them, and then everything was cleaned and disinfected before we come home. And at the time we had a nanny as well to help look after our son, so I just made sure that she cleaned and mopped the floors every single day and just was really anal, I guess, and around the hygiene of it all, from dealing with it to making sure we don't bring it home.
Sure enough, when the lab results came back, they confirmed that Matt and Jennifer were facing a Salmonella Brandenburg outbreak. About 5 days in, the clinical picture began to change, and sick cows began slipping their calves. Rotten calvings became a daily chore, and the sick mob took up nearly all of their time.
So we were out there and we were monitoring them every 2 to 3 hours.
And that includes during the night as well.
Yeah. So I mean, for us, they took more priority over the calving cows. Yeah, rotten calves are pretty tough to deal with, eh?
Once all was said and done, they would be out of pocket an estimated $90,000 in lost production, cow value, missing replacements, and treatment costs. When the dust settled, 15 of the cows in that mob of 300 were dead, and another 45 were dry. How common are outbreaks of salmonella like this? What options do you have for damage control, and could anything have been done to prevent it? Hi, and welcome to Top Farmers Know How, Audio Edition, bringing know-how worth having straight to your ears. I'm Amanda Kilby, one of MSD Animal Health's technical vets. Today I'm sitting down with 2 of my coworkers to find out the answers to these questions. Can you each introduce yourselves?
Tanakwe, Amanda. I'm David, one of the technical vets from MSD based in the North Island.
Yeah, g'day Amanda, I'm Sean Daly. I'm the MSD technical vet for the northern half of the South Island.
Sean, can we begin by having you explain what salmonella is?
Salmonella is a bacteria, and there's thousands of different types of it, about 2,500, all around the world, affecting all sorts of animals, from from turtles to sheep, cattle, and even people.
Where does it come from?
So Salmonella is a bacteria, as I said, and it's spread by healthier carrier animals. So they're animals that don't show signs of the disease, but are actually shedding usually low levels of bacteria, but enough to infect other animals. They'll be showing no signs of disease, and they can go on shedding like this for months or even years. Within a farm, it's spread by infected materials, so infected feces, aborted materials such as fetuses or placenta, and that can even be spread by scavenging animals such as seagulls or hawks as well.
Oh, so they would physically carry it from one farm to another.
Absolutely. Bacteria live for quite a long time in wet areas on pasture. So if it's wet, such as in the spring, it can last for quite a long time there until it gets picked up again. And then in calf sheds, any areas where there's fecal material or moisture, it can live in there survive for quite a long time.
Great, okay. So Salmonella Brandenburg, which we heard about when we were hearing from Matt and Jennifer earlier, what is so special about that type of salmonella? Kind of what does it do here in New Zealand?
Yeah, so Salmonella Brandenburg is one of these types of salmonella. It was first diagnosed in New Zealand in 1996, so it's relatively new on the scene. And what's special about Salmonella Brandenburg is that it causes late-term abortions and sickness in cattle, and that it shows up in particularly first calving heifers.
Okay, so that's different from other kinds of salmonella then?
That's correct. There's other ones around, such as Salmonella typhimurium, Salmonella bovis morbificans, which cause more enteric or affect the gut diseases.
Okay, so Salmonella Brandenburg is special in that it causes abortions late in the dry period, usually.
Yep, that's right. That's what we're seeing mainly. Yep. Brandenburg's quite interesting because of the severeness or how quickly an outbreak occurs in naive herds. You see a lot of cows affected, up to 35% in some herds of first calving heifers affected, and it happens that you get a lot of abortions, and that peaks through calving, and then most people are going in and vaccinating at that time, and that usually gets on top of it. But initially, in a naive herd, massive outbreak, a lot of animals affected. Other types of salmonella, a lot of farmers say, oh, yeah, we saw one or two cases like this last year, but didn't think too much about it. When Brandenburg turns up, it kicks off.
David, when you were working as a clinical vet, I understand you were based in the Waikato. So can you tell us about your experience?
Yeah, we don't really see Brandenburg in the North Island. It hasn't been recorded yet, surprisingly, since there's quite a few animal movements back and forth between the islands. So we mainly see the enteric type, so Typhimurium bovis morbificans were the two main subspecies that we'd see. Yeah, we did see probably primarily the odd one or two cases where on a farm we have some sick animals scouring off feed. We culture their feces and we detect salmonella. But you get the odd case where you get a huge outbreak where whole herds can actually be affected. Animals dying and lots of animals getting sick, and certainly a big financial cost to the farmer.
Mm. And are those cases able to be treated?
Yeah, so in the majority of cases, if you catch those cows early before they get really dehydrated and really succumb to the infection, they generally respond relatively well to things like fluids and antibiotics and sort of, just nursing care. But if you usually do get a few cases in any outbreak, or even just the odd case, we usually see one or two animals die because of the disease.
And what time of year do those outbreaks tend to happen? So we said Brandenburg outbreaks tend to happen in the late dry period. When would you be seeing enteric salmonella outbreaks?
So in times of stress, the typical times we can think of as things like around calving. So that seems to be where we usually see them. So
probably that bacteria is there before that, but then the cattle that haven't had it yet are stressed, and then they're more likely to get sick. Yeah.
So as like in Brandenburg, we have these healthy carrier animals that are carrying this bacteria in their gut, and when they get stressed, sometimes they start shedding significant numbers of bacteria, and any of those naive animals that are around that pick that infection up, then certainly can succumb to the disease. So that's primarily where we're seeing it. Now, people talk about contaminated feedstuffs and birds being a big issue. People often blame, such as saying, for example, PK. But they typically are not the source of infection. Usually it's these sort of healthy carrier animals that you just can't detect in the herd.
I see. Are there any sort of management stressors or diet changes that would make individual animals more likely to get salmonella?
Yeah, so just on diet itself, so we know that a healthy cow and a healthy rumen produces volatile fatty acids or VFAs, and they tend to be pretty protective against salmonella infection. And when animals are undergoing diet change, and that can sort of depress those volatile fatty acids and again succumb them to more likely to be infected. The other big thing that we've seen in the North Island is particularly around magnesium supplementation. So we've had quite a few case series of big salmonella outbreaks and sort of whole herds associated with a granulated form of magnesium. And we're not really sure why that is the case, but we're pretty sure that there is a association there.
But what you were saying is it's less likely to be contamination of the feed supplement, and it's more likely to be some kind of change in the gut environment caused by feeding that supplement.
Correct.
Yes, I see. Okay. So it sounds like if stress and animals going off feed are important risk factors for salmonella, but all cattle pretty much have times where they're stressed and off feed. It sounds like reducing those risk factors is going to be difficult for a lot of farms.
Yeah, correct, because you can't stop a cow from calving because that's the way you're going to get your milk.
Yeah.
The only way to really control or prevent salmonella is through vaccination.
Right. Okay. And our company, MSD, is the company that makes the salmonella vaccine available for cattle and sheep in New Zealand, and it's called Salvexin Plus B. Sean, could you tell the listeners a little bit about this vaccine? What's in it? How does it get used?
Yeah, sure, Amanda. So Salvexin Plus B has 4 strains of Salmonella in it, 3 common enteric forms, okay, and also it's had added to it Brandenburg as well.
Okay, so it's going to provide some protection against 3 of the most common enteric salmonella and Brandenburg.
That's correct. And your vaccination course with that vaccine, you give an initial dose, a sensitizer, and then a booster 4 weeks later. But the key thing there is that second shot should be at least 2 to 3 weeks before the key period of challenge that you have with salmonella. After that point, you then look at an annual booster to continue that protection.
Okay, and they need 2 shots initially, is what you're saying.
Exactly, 2 shots initially.
Okay. And David, are there any potential risks associated with vaccinating?
Occasionally, animals' temperature can be up for 1 or 2 days, and they do sometimes get a drop in milk production, but it doesn't seem to have particularly any long-term effects. So
in the face of an outbreak, is vaccination indicated? Would that help?
Yeah, absolutely. So with cattle, it is indicated. Vaccinating in the face of an outbreak, once you've seen a few cases you've confirmed that salmonella is there, discussed it with your veterinarian, going in and vaccinating, and that'll usually get cases down within 10 to 12 days, but still go on and give the second shot to give ongoing longer-term protection.
And I know you've been organizing and overseeing some MSD research, specifically on Brandenburg in cattle and also on Salvexin Plus B. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I first started in the role in 2017. There had been a lot of salmonella abortions coming down to Brandenburg had been noticed. We'd had reports over the last few years that it was starting to spreading and becoming more and more common. So we decided that we wanted to go out and find out what was really going on in a bit more of a formal setting. So we did a scientific survey. Local vet clinics that had cases put us in contact with 12 farmers. We asked them a survey with 63 questions on it, just looking at the impact of the disease, how it presented, those sort of things, how long it went for, then any associations with vaccination that they'd used, just to get an idea on what was really happening in Canterbury.
So on those 12 farms, how did the outbreaks typically progress?
So it was interesting. Initially, we thought that it was just first calving heifers affected. So we went and looked and talked with these farmers. It became apparent, interviewing those farmers, that adult cows, mixed age cows were affected as well. Some farms had only mixed age cows affected. So that was an interesting finding that we took out of it. And it pretty much presented as a very sick, depressed cow in the Springer mob. And we noticed that they were having trouble calving. They were doing a lot of assisted calvings. The calves late term, so right on when they were due, and having aborted fetuses and high temperatures, sick, depressed cows Quite often there was some extensive intervention needed to get that calf out, and then afterwards the cows becoming very sick, some of them dying anyway, despite the use of antibiotics, and more often than not coming into milk at all. So being pretty much a waste of time and struggling to get in calf again.
Yeah. So had any of those farms preventatively vaccinated?
No, that was a relief for me. None of those farms had vaccinated previously, but all the vets in those cases were recommending vaccination in the face of the outbreak and did vaccinate, most of them going in with the vaccine 2 to 3 days after the first case had been seen.
Okay. And at that point, would they know exactly which salmonella they were dealing with?
No, it's a tricky one. We can get a culture back saying it's salmonella very quickly within 2 to 3 days. To find out exactly what type it is takes a bit longer. There's some further testing required. But because we were in Canterbury, we'd seen so many cases and the presentation was so specific, we were ticking the Brandenburg box pretty quickly.
Yeah, there's not much else that looks like that.
That's right. And on the other side of things too is that the vaccine does contain the 2 other common strains in dairy cattle. So the farmers and the vets involved were quite happy going in and vaccinating in the face of an outbreak because of what they were seeing.
Yeah. Okay. And so the farmers that opted to vaccinate, what did they observe? How did that change the course of their outbreak? Yeah,
so in the survey work, we asked that exact question, and the average time was around about the 11-day mark that farmers were actually seeing things calm down. And that fits in with what we'd expect from the immune response. Vaccination is not immediate. We're relying for that animal to react to the vaccine and produce antibodies to protect it. And that takes about 11 days was what we're seeing. So that's some powerful information for vets and farmers so we can manage expectations in the future with that.
Yeah. And what did the farmers that you surveyed say they're going to do about salmonella going forward?
There was a lot of talk about changing graziers over the winter and looking at back fencing and things like that. But the main thing that stood out was that they were going to be vaccinating again the next year.
Right. And would those other sort of management changes be effective? Or based on what you guys were saying, now it sounds like salmonella is established. They probably have carrier animals.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Once it's there, carrier animals are there. It's on the farm. So changing the management practices are going to really struggle to have a major impact there.
Right. Except for maybe things like reducing stress or...
Reducing stress, yeah, those sort of things. But there's no way that you will ever eliminate salmonella now.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like your survey results reflect Matt and Jennifer Davison's experience. They vaccinated their entire herd during the outbreak, and now they continue to vaccinate each year, beginning with their in-calf heifers.
You can't prevent an outbreak from happening. If it's going to happen, it will happen. And the best thing you can do is vaccinate so that you don't have to experience it.
Amazingly, their strict biosecurity measures contained the outbreak to just the original sick mob of 300 cows, and none of their staff or family members got sick.
We even went as far as wearing face masks and bits and pieces, and it worked because none of us got sick and we didn't bring it home. We didn't pass it on to the newborn calves.
Like, we did everything we could, and we felt pretty good because we contained it to the 300, because if we got it through 1,100 cows, we might have been in a bit of trouble.
So, Sean, in addition to your farmer survey, you're just finishing up overseeing a trial looking at whether vaccinating cows with Salvexin plus B around dry-off provides protection to their calves through colostrum. Can you tell us a little bit about that trial and when you're expecting to have the final results to share?
Yeah, this is quite a cool wee study that we're putting together here. Overseas, when you look at it, there's been a lot of trial work done where we've vaccinated cows with a variety of vaccines against a variety of different strains of salmonella. And that's shown through production of colostrum by those cows being transferred onto the calves that there is protection against salmonella challenge in those calves in the early part of their life, which is really good. That's overseas data with overseas strains, overseas vaccines. We wanted to do it in New Zealand under the New Zealand system against the strains that we see here and using our vaccine to show that the same thing happened.
And so do you have any results, or are we still waiting?
Still waiting on results at this stage. We've finished the in-life phase. That's all gone well. So we're going to test blood samples from the calves immediately after, just seeing where the antibodies were in there and whether they're passed on to the calves. The goal is to demonstrate protection of the calves through that colostrum, just like what we get with rotavirus corona. When we want to protect calves against rotavirus scours, We vaccinate the cows pre-calving, and they produce the antibodies which are transferred in the colostrum and protect the calves.
But I guess the calf would have to drink enough colostrum for it to work.
Absolutely, that's so vital, and there's 100 different reasons why it's important to get calves to drink plenty of colostrum. This is just another
one to add to the list.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So since your 2017 farmer survey, how have you seen the dynamics of Brandenburg shift and change? So it was kind of confined to Canterbury, but I'm understanding that it's actually moving beyond Canterbury now. What have you seen in the field?
Absolutely. So what we've seen in Canterbury is that when we look at the outbreak over time, it started out, it spread across the Canterbury Plains, pretty much from the Rakaia River down to Timaru, and it's filling in the gaps now, basically. So we've got the vast majority of dairy farmers on the Canterbury Plain are now vaccinating for Salmonella. We've also seen it spreading outside of the region. We've seen it pop up in central Otago. We've seen it pop up on the West Coast. The West Coast experience is interesting and quite heartening. The veterinarians over there, as soon as they started seeing cases on the West Coast, they recommended to their farmers to go and vaccinate. And they've had good results over there. Those farmers that vaccinated haven't had it. There have been more cases, but in farmers that haven't vaccinated. So they know they did the right thing there to stop the massive explosion that they had in Canterbury. So that's heartening, and the vets really did their farmers a favour over there, giving that recommendation and acting proactively so the Canterbury disaster didn't happen again. There are other areas around the South Island where it's popped up as well, up the Murchison, Nelson Lakes area as well, Springs Junction. And so our recommendation is those farmers should also be vaccinating. And farmers right across the country should really be aware of this. For any sick cows around calving, late-term abortions, diarrhea, these sort of things, they should be checking for Salmonella.
Thanks, Sean. So, David, what do we know about vaccinating against enteric Salmonella? Sean's been talking to us about Brandenburg and its spread, but for enteric, do farms on the North Island especially, but all over New Zealand, do many vaccinate preventatively? Or
as a technical vet, we get tons of phone calls, particularly through the sort of September-October period, end of calving, early mating, where vets have called up and say, look, I've got an outbreak, what do I do? They're unvaccinated. And as a general rule, vaccination is recommended in those situations. And like Sean said, usually within sort of 10 days, we start seeing less cases occurring. It seems to tail off much faster than if we let the disease run its course. And typically those farmers that have had an outbreak definitely do not want an outbreak again. And so most of those guys are going on to preventative programs, so where they get 2 shots for their calves and then an annual shot for their heifer and their mature cows. And that typically tends to be at dry off because that's the most sort of convenient time. And it sort of fits in with the fact that, in a few months' time they'll be calving, and that tends to be the stress period of the year for those cases to see.
I see. So if a farm has never had a Salmonella outbreak, why might they consider vaccinating?
Well, vaccinating is actually relatively inexpensive. If you look at a Salmonella outbreak, and you compare the cost of a cow, for most herds, losing 1 or 2 cows, you've already paid for the cost of vaccination. And that's just the small cost. I mean, some of these farms that have had major outbreaks, they'll see a massive drop in production, so they've got that loss of milk. And I know of a few cases where they've actually had to stop supplying for several weeks until the outbreak's over, just because there's so much Salmonella actually detected in the milk that they've been trying to send to the supplier, and the supplier said, look, we can't take that anymore. There's been numerous cases, and it's well known that it's a zoonotic disease, so farm workers, farm staff and veterinarians have all succumbed to Salmonella infection when dealing with sick animals. So it's a human health factor as well, and we need to consider that.
Yeah, Jennifer Davison really emphasized the human aspect to Salmonella vaccination.
It's up there with the lepto vaccination, and it's the best thing you can do by your cows, but also by your people, because it's the people that have to deal with the outbreak and seeing it mentally, and for it to go on and on and on. And during calving, who wants to be dealing with something like that?
Yeah, exactly. So, David, for both of these types of Salmonella, it sounds like it's most practical for people to preventatively vaccinate around dry-off, and then you don't have to deal with the outbreaks over calving, over mating. You're not going to lose replacements because you've had late-term abortion. So it sounds like, just practically speaking, preventative vaccination would be the way to go.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. Again, the cost of the vaccination's pretty inexpensive, and it's a really good insurance policy,
Yeah, that's exactly what Matt and Jennifer say.
It's the cheapest form of insurance you can get. If you go and spend, 80 cents or something, a shot a cow, that's your insurance premium. It's not a lot of money for your herd. So I guess we'll always continue to do it.
So, David, what would be a typical ongoing presentation of salmonella on farms that vaccinate?
Yeah, that's really farm dependent. Probably the majority of the time, we don't see many, if any, cases of salmonella each year, which is, great for the farmer, and it's certainly showing that the vaccine's working well. But they do get the odd case or the odd farm that just seems to have a higher load of salmonella present on the farm, and so they'll often get just 1 or 2 cases. They tend to be a little bit milder. And we tend to find that, compared to what they had previously had, where they might get, 10, 20, 30 animals affected, 1 or 2 sort of acceptable. It's not perfect, but we get a pretty good result.
So we're using the vaccination, we're boosting the animal's immune system to fight the salmonella that's around, but we're not actually eliminating salmonella from the farm, like Sean was saying. Yeah,
correct. So, no matter what, the vaccination doesn't kill the salmonella per se. All it is creating antibodies for the animal so that they can sort of fight off the infection if they get exposed to it.
What are some extra things that farms could do in addition maybe to vaccinating?
Yeah, so making sure that they fence off those sort of feed bins so that animals can't get in and defecate on the feed. Other parts of, if they've had a big salmonella outbreak previously, there's probably a lot of contamination around, and so you've got to be a little bit careful about how they spread effluent over the pasture, because again, that could be a potential hotspot for salmonella. The other main thing that again we see that some of these herds that have been feeding that granulated form of magnesium, which we talked about before. So if they've had a problem with that in the past with salmonella, then it's definitely recommended not to continue to feed that. Just because of the high associated risk with that type of magnesium supplement. So they may choose to go back to dusting on pasture or other sources through feed.
Well, thanks so much, David and Sean, for sharing your expertise here with us today, and also to Matt and Jennifer for sharing your story. Do you have any final bits of advice for people listening who might be experiencing a salmonella outbreak?
I guess just the biggest thing is if you do experience it, you have to be in the paddock with your cows all the time. The more time you spend with them, the better success rate you will have.
So if you're unsure about the risk of salmonella on your farm, or if you have any questions about salmonella vaccination, talk with your vet. Salvexin Plus B and Rotavet Corona are vaccines available only under veterinary authorization. You can also visit our website, topfarmers.co.nz, for a fact sheet, a transcript of this podcast, and a full list of our references. Thanks so much for listening. Bye for now.